Welcome back to another session. I hope you're well. 2 sessions ago, I began a conversation about the topic gratitude. Um, in the session prior, I talked about um, the importance of gratitude and how um, gratitude is something that is a fruit of a spirit, of our spirit, and how uh, gratitude is simply the fruit of humility. And what it means to be human fundamentally means requires humility because on the physical plane of who we are nothing, we're dust. From dust we come and to dust we go back. And if you can remember that, then it gives you this um, grounding in recognizing that we're here today and we're gone the next day. And there is nothing to be anchored in this physical plane of life. Whatever we own, we are stewards of. We never owned anything. And therefore, all we take are the experiences, um, the triumphs and the tribulations that we face. And therefore, that gives us and should give us a grounding of humility. There is nothing as irritating as seeing young children. Those who are parents perhaps can relate to this. If you've ever come across a child, a young child that no matter how much you give them, you buy them a present or a gift, and they are insatiable. They always want more. There is nothing gifted back to you, the giver, whether that be by the form of excitement or emotions or gestures or body language. There's a sense of, is this all there is? And that kills the giver in you. Most people who suffer from depression, in my opinion, have an ingratitude issue. I think personally, if you remove small cases of clinical depression, it's almost impossible to be of a grateful spirit and have a grateful heart. Or let me correct myself: you can't have a grateful heart because our heart is pure. What we have is actually to be of a grateful mindset and attitude, and therefore express that through our hearts. It's almost impossible to be grateful and humble and be depressed. It doesn't mean you won't feel sad. It doesn't mean you will not feel down and outcast, but it means that you do not stay in a place of depression and primarily because you're not looking to your disappointments as a result of your unfulfilled expectations. I'll go a step further and say that I actually think that for most people who suffer from depression in society today, especially the West, a lot of what we call depression are simply our arrogance and our refusal to accept the fact that our unfulfilled expectations could not be met. Or, in other cases, that our rules, the rules through which we have constructed that the world has to live by and relate with us, have not been met or kept. Or it might just be because there's something inherently selfish about us. Solipsism is today's focus. And this is simply a process or mindset or the belief that the self is the center and that nothing matters out there other than your feelings. A lot of young people have been raised, especially people raised since the 60s in the West, who have not seen suffering, who have come to believe that life should just be about pleasure and desires, in other words, hedonistic experiences. And therefore, whenever there is a point in time where a rule is broken, and that rule could be that people give you what you want when you say you want it. Or it could be an expectation that says you expect to pass all your exams because you study hard. Or another could be simply a belief that life is supposed to be fair. And therefore, whenever you see unfairness, it knocks you off the scale. All of these have one thing in common. Me, 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 me. And therefore, people who suffer from depression, especially those who are adults, particularly, who have developed and should have developed their reasoning faculty, and therefore not children, we tend to find that wherever we see depression, amongst adults, there is a sense that the person cannot look without. They're always looking within. It's always about me. It's always about how I feel. It's always about how that made me feel. Or I'm not happy because my rules were not met or kept. There's always something about the self where we're looking to self. And one way to understand this is that we are simply energy. And spirit is looking for its expression through us. But it's not about what it expresses through you particularly. It's how it interacts with the other energy vibrations without or outside of yourself. Hence, you tend to find one of the things we teach people, something I try to practice, but I fail at, is don't hold a grudge. It's the whole thing. If someone has done wrong to you, you do good. Because if you say Mr. A did wrong to me, and therefore I must be cautious when I deal with Mr. B, and when it's in my position to help Mr. B, I refuse to help him because I was done poorly by Mr. A, you're not allowing the good, what is God, what is pure energy, to flow through you as part of the spiritual experience to assist and help him. And by stopping the flow and saying, no, I'll just provide for myself, you become like the Dead Sea. You should be an ocean where there is movement. There's some chaos, but there is order, but there is flow. You know, the first law of creation was movement. But the energy has to move through you to other people. So whenever you stop the flow, you effectively stagnate. And it's the stagnation that causes death within. And that death is what is creating damage to most people. So most people suffer from depression because they focus too much on themselves. They're too inward looking. It's all about them or their family. For some people, sometimes the depression is about a loved one and what the loved one is doing, how they're living their life, but you do not agree with their choices or decision, and therefore it puts you in a state of chaos. Your rules have been broken. Your expectations have not been fulfilled. And therefore there's something wrong. And all you do is focus on what's wrong, as opposed to thinking about what could I have controlled? And how important is this thing that I'm focused on? So we've raised the generation in the West of young people, which is why you see this prevalent, the depression epidemic. Among those who much might say the younger generation, I would say millennials or Gen Y and Gen Z and A, and the younger ones, is prevalent at a rate far above the prior generations. Now, here's a good question. If we go back to the silent generation, or even better still, let's go back to the silent generation and the great generation. There was a similarity between those two generations. Depression was not something that was even prevalent. Why? Even in the West, we hadn't developed neuroscience, and we hadn't advanced genomics and biome development, and medical sciences and pharmaceutical industry wasn't as successful as it is today. We didn't even have antibiotics. People died during giving birth. And you can name all the things that were just wrong. The technology had not developed. We were backwards. We were at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People were focused on food and shelter. We fluctuated between the physiological needs and our basic need of security and safety. And so one could say that we were humble and we were grateful because we had nothing. Those two generations, we still call them the backbone of our societies, especially in the West. You move forward to the baby boomers, and these were the people who rejected all of the foundational philosophies that the parents had. The grounding, the principles, the beliefs, the worldview, most of which were fashioned based on especially in the West, the Judeo-Christian philosophy. To believe in something greater than yourself, to humble yourself, not to be prideful, to pursue the virtues and abstain from the vices. The baby boom generation were the first generation that came across a period of peace. and therefore wealth. And they rejected everything their parents gave them in traditions. And they embraced the new doctrine. Their position was, no, we don't need physiological needs, and we do not need safety and security. We have solved those issues. We want love, and we want to feel that we belong to something. And so you started to hear the nonsense, make love, not war, and all the nonsense. And those generations reproduced and created my generation and the generations that followed, Generation X and Generation Y. And the focus was always all about how you feel. It's all about self-esteem. It's all about the self. How do you feel? Until you see young children are raised, and the one question you always hear from mothers to young children is, how do you feel? Or how did I make you feel? Oh, how do you feel? And so we've raised young people, which is why this epidemic is increasing, because a lot of these young people have been taught and conditioned from a young age that it's all about how they feel. That feelings has become, is their God. And if feelings are not the way it should be, hell has come. We haven't raised these people to be resilient. We've coddled their feelings too much. Now we place feelings above facts. We say, forget history. Forget what's going on around the world. It's all about yourself, your small circle. Hence my using the word solipsism. In that depression is simply, has become more environmental, more than anything. It's less sociological and physical and even spiritual. And it's become, in the West, has become more environmental and social. Why? Because all around us we have been creating monsters by the word happiness and feelings. We've been raised people to think, if it feels good, do it. If it doesn't feel good, don't. So when people actually get an experience that goes against the feel good, which is part of the human experience, however, they think the world has come to an end and they scream, it's over. Some people take the path of least resistance and say, well, do you know what? I'm not going to suffer. I'll just take myself out of the picture because I cannot bear to suffer, without realizing that life is suffering. The silent generation and the great generation, our forefathers and our fathers, understood this. The generations before them recognized that. It was all part of the human adventure, the part of the human spirit. And you pick up your cross, and sometimes the cross is heavy. And up the hill you go, and sometimes you cannot make it yourself. And occasionally someone comes and gives you a hand. But you have to carry the cross up the hill. It's your cross. And that this intelligence that exists will never give you a burden too much that you can carry. Now I remember going through difficult periods in my life, and one of the words that Mother Teresa said came to mind. See if I can remember. It goes something like this: Lord, I know you have a lot of. Now, Lord, I know you wouldn't give me a burden too much that I can carry or shoulder, but I wish you didn't believe in me this much. And those words echoed for many years in my heart, because at the back of my head and at the back of my heart, I knew that I subscribed to the saying, if the yoke, and I said this to a friend, some months back, if your yoke is too heavy, it's not of the Lord's. It hasn't come naturally. Let me say that again, for those who are not Christian leaning or leaning towards Judaism or Islam. If the burden you're carrying in life is too heavy for you, that yoke has not been given to you by the universe. It's not yours. You're carrying someone else's yoke. There is someone else's monkeys on your back. You're carrying a burden that was not designed for you. So we talk about oxes and yokes. And the point was that back in the day, if you had an ox, the yoke for the ox was designed for that particular ox. And so the ox could be fitted with a yoke, and it can work all day, and it would be exhausted at the end of the day. But because it was designed for its neck and its body, it didn't suffer bruises and severe injuries because it was designed for it. But if you took that yoke and you placed it on a different ox and a different animal that had a different configuration, neck, body, whatever, what you find is that maybe there's spacings, and as it carries this yoke, there's friction, and suddenly the yoke is bleeding, and on the wrong ox, if it's worked for the whole day, it could bleed to death. And that's where the saying came from, is that you're carrying a yoke that is not yours. Similarly, if you placed a tighter yoke on a bigger animal, ox, you could strangle it to death because it couldn't breathe. We all have a yoke that is ours, but we are mostly carrying yokes from other people. Depression is one of those yokes. It's not for you. You were supposed to have difficult times. My father would say there are fat times and there are lean times. Sometimes you celebrate, and sometimes you have to sit back and calculate how you made such a bad mistake. And in between both, you have a responsibility to carry the weight and pay the price. But keep in mind that you have to identify very easily, or very early rather, what is yours and what isn't yours. A lot of people who suffer from depression are too self-centered. And that solipsism yoke is not for you, which is why most people eventually break down, because you're not supposed to be looking within. You're supposed to be looking outwards. You're supposed to be looking to other people and thinking about how you can help them and how you can be a place of peace and refuge for other people. And hence the saying, give and it shall be given unto you, in good measures, pressed down and shaken up over, with other people return back to you. It doesn't say give and then expect. It says, no, give. Don't worry about receiving. You just give. And some people would say, I have nothing to give. Then you give what you have. And because you can gift something in your imagination before you have it physically to give. So you have nothing, but you can say, no, in my imagination, I can see myself giving someone something. And you focus on that part of the picture that tells you you're giving to another, you're serving. And in a way you don't know, somehow something comes your way and you find yourself in the physical giving to someone. Why? Because you can give without having much. But firstly, you have to give in your heart and in your spirit and in your mind. And a lot of people have depression and suffer from anxiety because they do not give. It's always about me. In many ways, our psychologist and a psychiatrist exacerbates this issue because when the time comes for diagnosis and treatment, the focus is on how do you feel? How do you feel? And so most people, when you say to people, well, put aside and set aside how you feel. Put on your trainers, we're going to the football ground and we're going to play football with all the other people. And you find the same young boy who is in his bedroom playing video games and depressed, goes to the playground and is with other kids and they're playing football with people he knows nothing about. And for a split second, the focus moves away from me, my feelings, and he's interacting with the world, he's giving. He's passing the ball, he's receiving, he's tackling, he's running, and for 2 or 3 hours, the same boy that said he's depressed is like a normal boy. And as soon as he stops and returns back to his environment, that is conditioned, the focus comes back to him. And one of the things you must learn how to do is understand how we have been like a sponge. We've been raised, most of us were raised to see ourselves as the center of the universe. And we were raised by parents who loved us. The intent was good. It was based on love. But you have to understand that everything has a purpose. Used incorrectly, we abuse that purpose. Used in ignorance, we misuse the purpose, or we abuse the purpose. But there is a purpose for everything. Love has a purpose. Love is not supposed to be given without condition or qualification, always. There is a time for everything under the sun. There's a time to love, and there's a time to withhold some love. And even there might be a time for you to ensure you practice the whole saying, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And many of us were raised as spoiled children. So today, whatever we see around us that reminds us that something is not consistent with what we expect the world and how the world should be, we go into a state of anxiety and panic. One, because we're not emotionally resilient. We haven't trained ourselves to understand how to deal with emotions. Secondly, we haven't been taught the categories of emotions and how emotions are created. We haven't been taught about the intellect. We haven't been taught about how the mind works. But even more importantly, we haven't been trained to understand that there are fruits of the spirit, one of which is gratitude and humility. You cannot have solipsism and be humble, because humility requires that you realize it's not about you. Hence the saying, what's the greatest of all commandments? Well, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love your God with all of your heart and with all of your strength and with all of your might, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. Inherent in all of that is one. The fact that I said before in the sessions prior, there's only one spirit. There is only one mind. There are several bodies. The spirit animates itself through the bodies, and there are several minds that have been developed in much more sophisticated ways, but it's just one mind. There's just one. And what we have to understand is that if there is one, then the spirit in me is the same spirit in you. We're animated differently by virtue of the body, but it's the same spirit. So I cannot look at you and feel jealous, because you and I are the same. And I cannot look at you and feel envious, and I cannot look at you and feel hateful. But even more importantly, I cannot look at myself and feel hatred towards self, unhappiness towards self, because I am spirit. And the key part of today's session, as I bring it to a close, is to simply say, if you want to transcend this whole depression epidemic that you might be facing, or people you know might be facing, you have to start getting out of yourself. Stop the focus on just you. It's part of the reason why people who live the life of purpose and a life of meaning were often those who wanted to serve. And by serving other people, in many ways, it's a fascinating thing. I think, you're distracting yourself from what you could be in the West naturally drawn to, which is to look inwards. And by focusing on others and helping, I'm not saying you should do this to the exclusion of yourself and you sacrifice yourself completely. I'm simply saying that by recognizing that the world doesn't revolve around you, and your feelings do not dictate the terms of engagement with other people. And by recognizing that you can control your emotions, and that it's perfectly fine to feel sad sometimes and to feel upset about the world and how it's shaping out to be sometimes, but you cannot dwell in those negative feelings, and you cannot simply get frustrated because something hasn't happened the way you hoped or wished that it would. This world is unfolding as it should, and despite all of its drudgery and broken promises, it's still a beautiful world. And for some people who think that there is a better world out there, one of peace, and that exiting this particular experience as quickly as possible will be the best way to get and start the new life. Let me leave you with what Sir Oliver Cromwell, or Lord Oliver Cromwell, once said. He says, "By the bowels of Christ, I beseech you, think it you might be mistaken." And that is to say, I hope that there is another life after this one that offers no suffering and no sacrifice and no pain. But what if I am wrong? And what if the fruits of my life in this unfair journey are exactly what I inherit and take to the next place? And the duties that I abstain from and run away from only go forward to confront me again, except I have to pay twice. In which case, it would mean that taking the path of least resistance, abdicating responsibility, would not be a smart strategy. It would be better to have lived and to play the cards of life with all of its injustices and inconsistencies, and with all of its perhaps unfairness, and to play the cards with honor and dignity, with virtue, and keeping your head up, rather than to avoid and escape from this life in the hope that something else will be awaiting you in the next life. Take the narrative away from yourself. Look to something without. Look to something out there. Look for places you can help. It's part of the reason why, as I end, we talk about AA, Alcohol Anonymous, and they have this 12-step program, or I think, is it 12 or, yeah, 12, 10-step program, 12. And one of the fascinating things is if you go through all of the first 11, you reason with them and you realize, well, these are great ideas and great strategies. If you were to achieve all 11, but you miss out the 12th, you relapse. But if you were to do the 12th and not the prior 11, the chances of success is very high. And the key question is, what is number 12? And number 12, or the last, is simple. If you're struggling with the difficulty, depression, anxiety, mental health issues, don't focus on self. Go out there into the world and find someone who is suffering like you and offer them help. And by doing that, what you do is you take the focus away from inwards and you're looking outwards. You're now looking to solve a problem. And in doing so, you're transformed. You go from being Saul to being Paul. The scales fall off your eyes because you realize, wow, it's not about me. Or you realize, oh shit, the people I've been persecuting were just me. We are essentially all the same. It's just me. And therefore, the best way to heal self is to heal the self in other people. And by healing the self in other people, the self in yourself also heals. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.